Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Ankney. I'm with Auto Success Magazine. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. Today we're going to talk with Ryan Leslie from DealerRater, and we're going to discuss negative reviews, common myths and truths revealed. You're in for a great presentation today. You'll notice at the bottom left of your screen there is a chat functionality where you can ask questions, and you can put them in throughout the presentation. We'll address all of them at the end. And if you have more questions as Ryan's asking, answering the questions, please, continue to ask, and we'll get them all answered for you. If we get way too many questions, we'll address them with emails, afterward. If you love this presentation and you'd like to share it with other people within your organization, please just send me an email. I am recording it, and so I can email you a link after the presentation. Ryan, please click the Start Sharing button on your screen, and I look forward to this presentation.
Done. Hopefully you can see it. Brian, can you confirm real quickly that you can see my screen?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here and excited to talk about some common myths and some truths revealed. I think we'll discuss those as we come to them around negative reviews. I've been with DealerRater for 5 years, and over that period of time, negative reviews is that topic that always comes up. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what I'm talking about. We always have questions about negative reviews, so I'm excited to get to address some of those for you. Let me give just a quick agenda so that everyone on the call knows where I'm going and where our conversation hopefully will lead to before we get to those questions and answers. I want to make sure that reviews are absolutely prevalent in the shopper journey. So I'm going to give you just a few points of evidence. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but I want to make sure you know that nothing's changed there. Reviews are just as important and probably more important now than they were even a few years ago. We'll talk about the purchase influence mix, and this is what it is that drives that consumer to choose your business, your dealership, your product, your people over others. And that purchase influence mix is really important. It's something that you need to have a good grasp of, so we'll take a look at that. I want to share with you, and this is going to be the meat of our discussion, 5 steps or 5 strategies for mitigating negative reviews online. I think there are 5 steps you can take away from this webinar that will help you 5 minutes after you hang up, so I want to make sure I share those with you. You need to have an action plan. We'll go through these in detail. You need to seek reconciliation first. That's always got to be the first step when it comes to a negative review, is trying to seek reconciliation. Remember your audience, and this is actually a typo. This should be audiences. That should be plural, and hopefully we'll be able to explain that here a little bit later too. You need to acknowledge and apologize appropriately. Those are 2 very different things when it comes to negative review responses, and I want to dive into that a little bit. Talk about the difference, when it's appropriate to acknowledge, when is it appropriate to apologize. And lastly, a key point with negative reviews, you have to be willing to investigate. We need to dig in and see what's really going on. Then we'll get to your questions. And please, Brian, I just want to emphasize this. I would love to answer any questions that you have, whether it's about negative reviews or reviews in general. I'd love to try to give you the best answer that I can for those. So please don't hesitate. If there's a question you have, I'd love to do my best to answer it for you. So let's get started. I had the pleasure of meeting Adam and Jamie from the Discovery Channel's Mythbusters a few months ago. And if you haven't been living under a rock for the last 15 years, you probably know who these guys are. If you haven't seen an episode of Mythbusters before, the concept of the show is really much like it sounds. They take a commonly accepted myth, and through a scientific process, they confirm or bust that myth. Many episodes involve blowing something up, which is why my middle son, he's in the middle of the picture there, why he's so excited about the show and why he likes it. He's kind of a pyro. I didn't know this, but apparently mimicking Jamie's mustache, Jamie's on the right, they call it the walrus, and all of the kids in the audience were doing that at the same time. It was a pretty fun thing to watch. As an industry, we've been talking about reputation management, which I don't really love that term, but we use it here for about 5 years. It's really been a buzzword that we've been aware of in the industry. So I thought I'd borrow this formula from Jamie and Adam. They've been doing Mythbusters for 12 years and apply it to one of my favorite myths in the automotive industry on the retail side, and that's negative reviews are bad for business. Scientifically speaking, in order for our myth to be confirmed or busted, we really have to first establish that reviews matter to the consumer in the first place. If reviews don't matter, then by extension, bad reviews certainly don't matter, and our myth is busted before we even get started. But I don't think that's the case. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on talking about how important reviews are. I know if you're on this call, you likely already know the importance of reviews in the shopper's journey, but we have to be true to that scientific method. I can't start talking about negative reviews or the importance of them rather, before we talk about how important reviews are to begin with. Mythbusters has this famous disclaimer they do, and they always kind of make fun of it, but they say, don't try this at home. And here's an experiment that I want to encourage you to try at home. You should be Googling your business's name, and you don't have to add any geographic modifiers. You don't have to add reviews or ratings. All you need to do is put in the name of your business. And remember that most consumers use search engines like Google, like they used to use a phone book. So I want you to consider this typical consumer journey. I heard your radio ad, or I drove by your store, and I saw your giant purple gorilla on the top of the building, if that's what you're into. But I don't remember the phone number. I don't remember your address. So off I go to the web to look you up. And look at all the stars, all of the review content that shows up above the fold on Google's SERP 1. That'd be Search Engine Results page number 1. Remember that Google, in this case, their main job is to try to identify what you're searching for before you actually search for it. They gain an audience by analyzing all of their searches and trying to figure out what you as a consumer are going to be most interested in so that they can give you that information before you ask for it. That satisfies your needs and it makes them more attractive to you. So remember, all I did here is search for the business's name. I searched for Bozard Ford, that's it. And look at all the places where a review shows up. Google knows that one of the things I'm going to want to search for after I search for your business name is likely to be reviews. Consumers trust third-party reviews. They trust them to find a product. They trust them to find the price, the place, and eventually the person that they want to deal with. We've got a lot of evidence that shows that those 4 Ps, product, price, place, and person, are what reviews are actually speaking to and what consumers are looking for when they're reading third-party review content. If you aren't familiar with this study from Bright Local, you should write this one down and take a look at it after today's call. If you do a search for Bright Local and Search Engine Land, that was the name of the site that this was posted on, this will come up in search and you'll be able to find it really easily. For the sake of time, I'm only going to highlight just really 2 of the key findings in this study, but there were a lot of interesting pieces of information in here. 85% read 10 or more reviews during their purchase journey. 85% of the consumers that they surveyed read 10 or more reviews. And 88% of those consumers trust online reviews as much as they do personal recommendations. That's that old word of mouth, that coveted word of mouth, the conversation you have with your neighbor over the fence. That's 88% of people feel the same way about an online review as they do that personal recommendation. That is why, that's one of the reasons why anyway, review content shows so prevalently on search engine results page number 1 for Google, because consumers value and they trust that content. It makes sense for Google to put it there and associated with the search name. With this study and the anecdotal evidence that we looked at with search just a few minutes ago, I think, and for our case here for Mythbusters, I think we can definitively say that reviews are really important. But what about those negative reviews, the point of our call today? In keeping with the theme, I think we can look at one more point of research. I'd like to point this study out to you as well. This came from Harvard's Business Review. Excellent article, and it's entitled, What Marketers Misunderstand About Online Reviews. I'll read you a quick excerpt, and then I want to highlight a few of the points of data from this study. This excerpt goes this way. The wealth of peer-to-peer information and the unprecedented availability of expert opinions give consumers access to what's known as absolute value. That's a rich, specific sense of what it's like to own or use the goods they're considering. End quote. In our case, for retail automotive, it extends beyond the goods to the service. Consumers can know the absolute value of buying from you before you even know you're being shopped. They're out reading review content of other consumers' experiences, good and bad, and making a judgment about what it's like to buy from you. The 10-second summary of this article, they did speak about automotive in here, so it's an interesting read. But what they were talking about is companies as varied as HTC for smartphones, Hyundai for automobiles, Roku, you may be familiar with them, the set-top streaming boxes. Those companies have all benefited dramatically from a shift in the way that many consumers are obtaining and processing product information. They describe that as the purchase influence mix. The purchase influence mix is made up of 3 things. There's 3 things that are going on in the consumer's mind when they're considering a purchase. It's their prior preferences, beliefs, and experiences. That would be that prior experience in red. Information from marketers. That would be marketing messaging. And input from other people or information services. So this is referred to as, again, that purchase influence mix, and that's what's going on in the consumer's mind when they're thinking about making the purchase. What we need to understand is that this is a zero-sum game. The greater the reliance on one source, the lower the need for the others, according to the consumer. So if the impact of input from others on a purchase decision about a food processor, for example, goes up, then the influence of marketing or prior experience, or in some cases both, has to go down to reflect it. If you think of it as 100% or a piece of pie, there's only so much pie to go around, and as online reviews and other peer input have exceeded the importance of marketing messaging and even prior experiences for some product, it's taking a bigger piece of that pie. These aren't actual stats. I want to be really clear about what you're looking at in these graphs. I just wanted to illustrate what zero-sum game is. What was interesting in this study is that different products fit into a different spectrum for how much prior experience or marketing messaging or peer input actually plays into the decision-making of the consumer. I want to take 2 seconds here, just a quick side note from our discussion, and talk about what I believe are going to be some buzzwords that you're going to want to know coming up this year and into 2016. And those buzzwords are earned versus owned media. Owned media is what you say about you. It's your radio ads, your television ads, your billboards. All of those mediums, easy way to remember it, all of those mediums where you have complete editorial control of the message, those are owned media. Earned media, the other side of that is earned media, and that's what others say about you. It's earned. You can't buy it, and you have to earn it with every interaction. Simply satisfying that customer on one occasion 5 years ago, it's not enough to get them to sing your praises to friends and family today. We know this. You have to continually earn that online review. You have to continually earn that positive sentiment from the consumer. So back to our topic at hand. Again, that's earned versus owned, and I just wanted to introduce that to you and make sure you knew about it. But back to our topic at hand. This study suggests that the myth, I think, is holding firm. Reviews as a form of earned media, they have that extreme amount of power to influence shoppers. But we all know that with power, that word power, sometimes comes abuse of power, and the same thing has been found to be true with influence. Once some marketers discovered the sway that reviews had over consumers, the opportunity to abuse that sway unfortunately became too tempting for some. And it leads me to another one of those buzz terms I wanted to introduce you to on today's call, and that's astroturfing. Astroturfing, it's really what it sounds like. AstroTurf is that artificial substance that's meant to look and perform like something natural. It's more durable, and it's purpose-driven, right? Astroturfing, or the concept of astroturfing, is really artificial content that's meant to trick consumers into thinking it's something that it's not, into thinking that it's something that's real. And what we've seen recently is that consumers really don't like to be tricked, and they're becoming somewhat cynical and somewhat defensive about content that purports to be earned media when it's actually owned media. Got some examples of that for you. This PBS episode ran earlier this year, and it was just the latest in the string of really newsworthy events that encouraged consumers to be really discerning about their acceptance of reviews on certain platforms. So you may remember in our own industry, Edmunds sued a company called Humankind out of Texas into oblivion. They caught them registering something like 2,200 fake accounts, and they were submitting that on, submitting reviews to those accounts on behalf of dealers back in August of 2013. That same year, Yelp sued a law firm for seeding their page with fake content, and famously, the state of New York actually sued 19 different companies. They had a sting operation, and they revealed that those 19 companies were guilty of buying, selling, or manufacturing fake review content in some form. Sum total of those judgments was something like $325,000. It was a substantial amount of fines that were assessed. Consumers are being educated. This is something we need to know, and this all relates to negative reviews. Consumers are being educated to be skeptical and to really consider the source of review content. It's imperative that when you share reviews, you need to cite a source. That's that earned component, right? We don't want to treat owned media like earned media. We need to be careful with that. This PBS piece, it really did a good job. I actually enjoyed watching it, and I was a little nervous when I saw the title, but they did a good job of highlighting the fraud protection efforts that third-party sites like DealerRater and others undergo to assure the credibility of content to consumers. They recognize that credibility of content is all that a review site can really offer to the consumer. If the content isn't credible, then there's not much to talk about. So let's review real quickly what we know so far. Reviews are all over search. We talked about that already. You see them all over SERP 1. Hopefully that wasn't news to you. And you already know that when you Google your business name, you're going to see a lot of review content. We know that reviews are an important part of that purchase influence mix. We also know that consumers are being educated to discern owned media that's meant to look like earned media. They're going to very quickly be able to tell the difference between the two. And they're not going to appreciate it if we try to pass off owned media as earned media. So how do negative reviews fit into these things that we already know? I would contend that they're extremely valuable to the consumer because they validate positive reviews. This is an interesting study that DealerRater did. This is our internal data. DealerRater takes in a ton of consumer feedback each and every month, and most people on the call will recognize us as really the premier place repository for reviews for automotive. We've got nearly 2 million reviews on the site, and we have a new review that posts every 55 seconds. So we have a lot of interaction with consumers. What you may not know is that we ask other questions of consumers too, because we want to understand that shopping behavior and understand how reviews really play in to the decisions that they make. So recently we asked this question: when researching the right dealership to do business with, which type of review would you find most valuable? We asked this of 14,000 people, and I want you to see what the responses that we gave them the choice of were and how they responded. So the first answer was positive reviews that summarize an experience that went well. They would find that valuable or more valuable than negative reviews describing a situation gone wrong that included a response from the dealer. So I'm going to take a quick drink while you guess which one of these two answers, or what percentage of people, let me ask it this way. What percentage of people do you think responded that negative reviews describing a situation gone wrong at a dealership that included a response from the dealer were actually more valuable than positive reviews that summarized an experience that went well? Brian, do you want to take a guess?
Oops. I would probably say I usually look to negative reviews that don't have cuss words personally.
Hopefully that's 100% on a site that's monitoring that content. We want to make sure that's not happening.
Well, that is the grammar. I usually look like if somebody's complaining about a business and their grammar is terrible, then I don't put a lot of stock in it. But if it's a very genuine complaint, that's usually what I look for, is a genuine complaint and then how they handled it.
It influences, there are a lot of things that influence how a consumer responds to the content, positive and negative for sure, what value they place. I'll let you off the hook and give you the answer on this one. Negative reviews, this is again according to 14,000 respondents that answered this question when they submitted a review for a dealership in DealerRater. 20% said that negative reviews describing a situation gone wrong that included that response from the dealer were more valuable than a regular review. Now, why? That should be the question you ask right away. Why is that? Well, I think it's because they validate all those positive reviews. When Google wrote the ZMOT book, ZMOT, if you're not familiar with that, I want to say that was August of 2012, somewhere in that area, when that ZMOT, or Zero Moment of Truth is what it was called, the book came out. One of the things they said was that consumers typically write reviews for altruistic purposes. They want to help other consumers make a good decision. That's why they do it. So what's really interesting to me, knowing that, they also said that most reviews online were positive. I think it was in the order of 73, 75%. I can't remember exactly what the stat was, but go read the ZMOT book, and overwhelmingly reviews were positive more often than negative. So that may be some of what's going on there. The consumer wants to see a negative review because it validates the positive ones, and it gives them something of an inkling as to how you're going to handle yourself when something doesn't go right. If you have no negative reviews, that consumer might do one of two things. They might suspect that it's too good to be true, and they're thinking that it's owned media that's being purported to be earned media, or they just feel like maybe the sample set is too small, like you haven't had enough experiences with consumers because there isn't a negative. You need negative reviews to validate. I'll say this, they can be extremely powerful, but they have to have a mitigation strategy. You have to have a plan in place to mitigate those negative reviews. Don't miss the second part of this answer. It's that response from the dealer that I think is what's most attractive to the consumer, not just the negative reviews. So with that, let's look at those 5 strategies I introduced to you in our agenda, and let's get tactical and talk about those 5 things that you need to do to mitigate the effects of negative reviews. First one is easy. It's going to happen. If you ask for enough reviews, you're going to get a negative one. That's going to happen. So you have to be prepared, and you have to have an action plan. When you think about an action plan, what I want you to think about is know the wheres, the whens, the whos, and the hows. I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but when I was a kid watching Saturday morning cartoons, G.I. Joe used to have these PSAs, the public service amount, right, or public service announcements, and he would always say, knowing is, they'd say whatever it was, and then knowing is half the battle. Well, I think with negative reviews, knowing is more than half the battle. Ignorance of a negative review is not going to be an excuse the consumer is going to accept for not having a response. You need to know where negative reviews are on the web and when they post so that you can respond appropriately. You also need to know who's responsible for responding. That needs to be worked out ahead of time. If you don't have an action plan in place, you should work to create one with your team. And lastly, you got to know how. How are they going to respond? What's your playbook? What exactly are you going to have them do? What are the goals? What are the objectives when you respond to a negative review? That's all part of your plan. I would also say that you need a plan in place to have negative reviews go across the desk of your general manager or whoever it is at your dealership that has the biggest title. They need to see negative reviews. They need to see every one. And that needs to be a commitment that your management team makes to make sure they know what's being said, what kind of negative reviews are being posted for the dealership. I wanted to share this is something that we give to our certified essentials dealers, those dealers that partner with us. And it's a simple flow chart. And really all that it is designed to do is help those stores to have a process to go flow through the beginning to the end when you receive a negative review down to the crucial parts at the end about asking that customer to update the review. So I wanted to share this and show this. It is something that we typically only give to our partner stores. Brian, if this is okay with you, and I should have cleared this with you first, I apologize, but I'd be happy to send this out to anybody on the call that wants to get a look at it. I think it'll help you to just kind of frame up and structure that response strategy. Use it as a part of your action plan. So if that's okay with you, anybody that wants that, I'll be happy to send that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. Let's move to step number 2. This is seeking reconciliation first. Here's another stat for you from Lee Resource Inc. 95% of unhappy customers will return to your business if an issue is resolved quickly and efficiently. I think I know that to be true of my own consumer experiences. It's the times when something goes wrong that I often feel the most tied to that business. If they fix it, if it gets corrected, I'm much more loyal to them the second time than I would have been the first time. If nothing gets done to address it, then I think most consumers are done and they're moving on to the next opportunity. But there is something to be said for that opportunity to turn a problem into a solution creates a raving fan. I really believe that most negative reviews anyway are genuine, and they're written by a consumer that had an experience that didn't meet with their expectations. I understand that sometimes their expectations may be completely out of line. That's a given, and it's a part of the joys of retail. But some people, as firmly planted as they are in their own reality, we need to have that response strategy. And DealerRater does teach and leave room for the reality that some of these negative reviews aren't what they purport to be and need to be reported to the review site. But the main point here is that you have to start with the expectation that this is a real consumer. This is somebody that had an experience. It's not a competitor. It's not a disgruntled employee. Far too often, I see dealers ignore these reconcilable situations because they prefer to believe that negative review is false or written under false pretenses, and I just don't think that's the case. You need to consider the source and consider the terms of service or terms of use and community guidelines on any site that you have a review. Some sites are more neutral than others, and they will provide some tools to help you seek reconciliation. You should always read the terms of service and terms of use on a review site before you plan your response strategy. You need to respond as soon as you can. Think of it like a clock is ticking when you get that notification that a negative review is posted somewhere on the web. The sooner you can reach out and try to take that conversation offline, the likelier you're going to be to create a point of reconciliation and win that customer back to your favor. If you're able, this is one that's often missed too, if you're able to find a resolution, the next thing we have to do is ask that reviewer if they'd be willing to update their review. A lot of different websites will allow a consumer to update their review. And I would suggest a simple trial close, something like this. Mrs. Consumer, I have to ask, thank you for giving us the opportunity to fix that problem, but do you still feel the same way about us now that you did when you wrote that review? It's a really simple trial close, simple question. If the answer is, yeah, I do, then you still got some work to do. And there's some opportunity to try to dig in a little deeper and see if there's something that you can do to help that customer. If the answer is, no, absolutely, Brian, you fixed my problem, thank you, I'm coming back to have my next service done here because I really appreciate what you did. Great. That's perfect. Let me ask a favor of you. Would you be willing to update that review? Because the reviews we have online are reflective of our business, and we want everybody to know that even though we messed up, we did take care of you, and we made it right. And that'd be really important. Would you be willing to do that? And people will do that. Again, remember that stat from Google, from Zmont. They write reviews for altruism. That's why they do it. They want to help consumers. They want to help other consumers like them. Just another little DealerRater stat. I don't want to be too heavy on DealerRater stats, but these are the stats I know, right? I'm privy to this information. I would assume it's similar on other properties too. But in our most recent data poll of this, we're showing that over 100 negative reviews a month through the process of what we call Resolution Advantage. Through that period of time that the review is in Resolution Advantage, more than 100 of them a month, 100 negative reviews are being converted to positive reviews, being updated by consumers to reflect what the dealership did during that Resolution Advantage period. That's a pretty strong stat, and it proves to me that consumers really want to reconcile. They don't want to write negative reviews. They want to have a good experience. And often they're writing a negative review because they didn't have a good experience. That's an opportunity for you to reach out and fix the experience or try to fix that experience and create the opportunity for them to update their review. Number 3, you need to remember your real audience when you respond publicly, and I've got that capitalized here. There's always 2 audiences in a public response to a negative review. If you don't know that consumer, if you've picked up this negative review and you have no idea who that person is, so you can't respond privately, or the website that it's on doesn't give you the opportunity to respond privately, then you need to be thinking in terms of 2 audiences with 1 microphone. And your response has to appeal to both. Your first audience is going to be, sorry, I've got a little glitch in my presentation here. The first audience is your reviewer. Your response needs to include that overture to take the conversation offline. That's what your public response should look like if you don't know who that reviewer is. You want to offer to take it offline and give the contact information of a representative with the authority to correct that perceived problem. The second audience is all those future customers, that 20% that want to see how you respond. And you need to be careful about how you respond for that reason. So I would suggest always take the high road. Always, always, always offer reconciliation. Always offer contact information with somebody that can remedy the problem. A good strategy is to thank that reviewer for taking the time to write the review and assure them that you're very interested in hearing more about what happened so that you can take action. 2 audiences, same microphone with a public response. Remember it that way. You need to reach out to the person that wrote it in the hopes of reconciliation, and you need to craft that response in such a way that any other person reading that review that doesn't know the situation knows one thing. You are eager and anxious to help that consumer, and you've offered a path to provide help to them. That's what you want to communicate in your public response. Number 4, this is probably the most controversial thing in the whole presentation because, and I'm going to own this, sometimes the vendors that want to help portray a situation where we need to apologize fervently, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I think you need to always, always acknowledge that whatever service you provided or whatever experience that consumer had didn't match with their expectation. And you should absolutely acknowledge that. And you can apologize for the fact that it didn't meet their expectation. That's okay. I don't think we need to always apologize that they didn't get what they wanted. That's different. There's a very different dynamic going on there. I would suggest you always acknowledge that the consumer's expectation wasn't met and that you personalize the response so that that comes across. Remember, an apology at its root is an admission of guilt. And I think a lot of times if we're apologizing for things that we don't have any control over, it weakens us in that reconciliation discussion. The consumer is going to automatically assume that you're prepared to do something for them that you, frankly, may not be able to do. If they were unable to buy because they didn't have the credit history to support the loan that they wanted, I don't know that apologizing profusely for that is the right thing. You can apologize that they didn't have the experience that they were expecting. There's a very clear difference between those two things. I guess the main point here, when you read negative reviews, your response just can't be a copy-paste strategy. You can't have the same public response for every negative review. That's why your general manager and why your executive management team needs to see these negative reviews so that they can help to craft that personalized response. I would also suggest that you reserve the responsibility for review responses, negative review responses, for somebody internal. It's great to get some assistance for monitoring. That's an okay thing to do, I think. But when it comes to the actual response, somebody internally needs to own that and needs to take ownership of that communication between the customer and the dealership. Last one, and I saved this for last. Hopefully I'm not going too fast, and I'd love to take questions on any of these things. We need to not be so quick to dismiss those negative reviews. You got to investigate every one. Sometimes it's going to take a little longer to look into than others, but that time is time well spent. When you investigate, you need to ask, is there any truth to this review? Or is there any way that a reasonable person might feel this way? Those are the questions you have to ask when you look at a negative review. If we're instantly dismissing it as a disgruntled employee or a competitor, then we're missing a lot of opportunity. The reason, again, that I think it needs to go across the desk of your general manager is because of the lost opportunity that a negative review represents. And yes, there is that lost opportunity if you ignore those negative reviews and a consumer eliminates you from the consideration set because they don't see a response from you. Yeah, that's a lost opportunity for a future sale. I think the greater loss in this case is that lost opportunity to use the feedback to improve your consumer experiences. You got to think of negative reviews like a focus group. They're like a really expensive focus group you could never truly afford. And the other thing we have to be thinking about when we look at negative reviews that are posted online, on online review sites, is that they're often different feedback sets than those that you would get from an OEM CSI surveys. Because these are consumers that chose not to buy from you. There's somebody that was in your store, interacted with your store, and then chose not to complete a purchase in most cases, and they tell you exactly why. That's the kind of feedback that we should be really acutely interested in. What are we doing? What kind of things can we do better? What little changes can we make as a dealership that are going to meet that consumer experience and improve a consumer experience to attract more buyers? If you want to positively impact your bottom line, you have got to investigate your negative reviews. I think that's one of the clearest ways you can positively impact your bottom line, by investigating your negative reviews. Let me recap. We got to remember that reviews, both positive and negative, are powerful influencers in that shopper's journey. We saw that in, if I could give you one slide, it's Google search, right? We know that reviews are going to show up in there because it's important and it's prevalent in the purchase index. Negative reviews serve to validate those positive reviews when a mitigation strategy is in place. And negative review mitigation is going to take some effort, and it requires a strategy that you have in place for the dealership. You need to have an action plan. You need to always seek reconciliation first before you think about, is this a disgruntled employee? Think about, could this be a consumer? And if so, how can I improve the experience they have? Remember your audiences. Acknowledge and apologize appropriately. Don't start out with a groveling apology for something that requires an acknowledgement. Investigate and address those areas for improved consumer experience. I think, again, big point here. Negative reviews give you insight into what that consumer is thinking and feeling in your processes and with your people. And you can use that to positively impact your bottom line. So here's our myth, and we're kind of closing up here. The evidence has been presented. We've experimented. We've looked at lots of data. We actually saw something from Harvard. Those guys are really smart. It's time for us to decide if we've busted or confirmed that myth that negative reviews are bad for business. And I think it's busted, mostly. Negative reviews are bad for your business if you don't have an action plan or a response strategy, but they can be exceptionally good for your business. If they validate your positive reviews because of the response that you provide, that you are good people, that you're doing the best you can, and sometimes you have a miss because you're people dealing with people, that's one way that a response can validate your positive reviews. But they also improve your people and your process when you investigate them and provide those improved consumer experiences. So Brian, with that, I'm done with the part I've prepared, and I would love to take any questions that may have come in from the audience.
Absolutely. Who do you recommend responds to a review? Is it ever recommended that a specific salesperson or a service advisor responds? Good question. The greatest success that I've personally seen from this is coming from a person responding that doesn't have necessarily an emotional attachment to the specific situation that the review is about. So I don't think that it's important, or probably there's a couple different things we could talk about here, but if I had a bad experience with a salesperson, I don't want to see a response from the salesperson. Really all I'm doing, that's just perpetuating that experience. I would like to see a response from the salesperson's boss. Some of the best responses that I've seen come from the person whose name is on the side of the building. Those are the ones that really show the consumer that my needs are going to be met because I'm talking with somebody whose name's on the side of the building, and I know for sure that they're going to be able to carry through with whatever resolution we come up with. I don't personally think that it makes sense for the salesperson or service advisor to respond. It really needs to be, I think it really needs to be communicated to that reviewer that this has the attention of the entire organization from the top down. Okay.
Good question.
All right, hold on. I've got one here that I got cut off. Let me paste it into another program. It says, is it true that more upset customers will tell more people than a happy customer?
I think we know that, I think conventional wisdom is that, right? The thing that's changed is that when people tell their friends and family, they're telling them digitally in most cases now. Facebook provides a forum for that. Online review sites are rocketing in popularity, and we know that, again from Bright Local, we know how many consumers value an online review, 88%, as much as something they would hear from a trusted friend. I think conventionally that's true, and it still does happen in word of mouth. What we need to be aware of is that reviews, negative and positive, both have a tremendous opportunity to influence your shoppers, and when you're leveraging your positives, that's an effective way of communicating that word of mouth advertising from those that have done business with you. I think there's some truth. Sorry, I'll add one more thought to that real quickly. There is some truth that somebody that has a bad experience is probably initially more motivated to share that experience in terms of a negative review. We've said this in the past. You don't have to ask somebody to write a negative review. And when you look at negative reviews side by side with positive reviews, oftentimes your negative ones are the ones that really tell a story. They're the ones that it's easy for a consumer to follow along and understand the situation from that consumer's perspective because they usually share a lot of information in detail. It's harder to get that same kind or elicit that same kind of review when it's a positive experience. One of the things that we talk about a lot is don't ask for reviews. When you ask for a positive review, don't ask for a positive review, ask for a story. And if you communicate it that way to the consumer, then they know you prompt them a little bit better to share more detail and give a little more insight into their experience.
How important are Facebook reviews versus Google reviews?
I think they're both important. I don't know that it's necessarily Facebook reviews. In my own timeline, what I see often is my friends and family asking for input on particular businesses in the area, right? So I think there's a couple different ways that you can look at that. Any review that's leveraged well by the dealership is good, and you're going to have different customers that interact in different places. I wouldn't steer you away from collecting Facebook reviews necessarily. I think they do play to a certain audience. But what we have to remember is that when we leverage content, it's the credibility of the source sometimes, whether that's on Facebook or any other. So a positive review from a Facebook, from something that doesn't look like a credible, we've seen this happen in the industry. I'm stammering a little bit to answer this question, but what you don't want is a bunch of Facebook reviews from countries you don't live in showing up on your profile page. That isn't going to help you. Credibility is important.
Do you have any tips for getting more Google reviews?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that you can do that. I think the thing that most of the time we forget is we have to ask. We just assume that the consumer is going to do it, and they won't. You need to leverage your reviews in the sales process. And one of the things DealerRater teaches and trains is a concept called the life cycle of reviews. And Phil, my friend Phil Young from Sioka Honda is the one that really explained this to me in a way that I could understand. But in short form, he recognized that when he leveraged his review content, when it became an active part of his process to earn customers, any lead response he did, anytime he had opportunity, it was read my reviews on DealerRater. That's what he would say. Read my reviews on DealerRater. You don't have to take my word for it. I want you to see what everybody else has said about doing business with me, because that was trustworthy to that consumer. What he found was when he closed the loop, he sold the car, delivered, had a happy customer, they had a great experience. He would say, remember that website I showed you with all of my other favorite customers on it? Because I want to ask you to share your story too. Would you be willing to take a few minutes, do me a personal favor, and share your story? I think regardless of site, that kind of a strategy, some are better than others, especially for the individual salesperson. If you've got tools that you can leverage that content where it's exclusive to you, that's extremely beneficial. But it's how you ask. It's the way that you ask for a story and leverage your review content in the sales process that ends up helping you close that loop and really close that life cycle of a review. The review you ask for today becomes the impetus for the next consumer to ask for you by name if you're a salesperson. We've seen that happen time and time and time again.
Okay. How do you have an action plan when you don't know what the consumer will hit you with?
Well, an action plan is really the who's going to respond, right? So I know that. I can work that out ahead of time. I know who on my team is going to be responsible for actually posting that response. I know the where, because I know where reviews are going to be posted. I know which sites I need to be monitoring, or I know that I have a monitoring tool in place. There are a lot of great monitoring tools. The web's too big for you to have one person constantly trying to manage it. You're going to miss stuff. I really would suggest a monitoring tool to help you to pull all of those reviews into one spot where you can actually manage them or know that they're there. You know the hows. And when I say action plan, I think that's specifically what we're doing. It's who, it's how, it's when, it's where are we going to respond to these things. Your action plan, and whoever asked that question, great question. I would encourage you, email me. I want to send you that flow chart because I want you to see kind of how it's structured. And I think it's having a structure and knowing who's going to respond, what our end goal is, why is it that we're responding to these things. Having those ideas in mind is what helps you to create that action plan.
Okay, what should you do when a review is never responded to and it's almost a year old? What should you do with old reviews that still come up in searches?
Yep. So old reviews are going to happen, and especially if you're new to responses, you're going to find stuff that you didn't know about. And what we typically suggest is a public response that would say something to the effect of, I just became aware of this. That's going to be good, right? Because anybody that looks at it after you, they just became aware of it too. It's not like they've known about it for a year. They're seeing it after you've responded in most cases. So I think for an aged review, there's a couple different things going on. We know from internal data that consumers show a strong preference for current content. They don't care about what happened 6, 8, 9 months ago. They care about what happened 2 weeks ago. And internally, in the dealership world, we know that things change rapidly at the dealership, and our customer experience curve can move quite a bit in a short period of time. So the things that happened a year or two ago are probably not reflective of how the dealership operates any longer. The good thing is that the consumer also operates that same way. They want to see current content. They care about what happened last week, not about what happened last year. I think your best defense against an old review and against any review that doesn't get a response is that positive. Remember what we talked about with our public responses. You got two audiences. Your audience, likely for an old review, is going to weigh more towards that future prospect that's reading your response, and we need to craft a good response that shows that you're still anxious even a year later to help that consumer if they reach out. Provide contact information for somebody with authority to make decisions to help rectify and create resolution. I will share an interesting story. I had this happen, this has been, probably 3 years ago, but I had a dealership that had a negative review on DealerRater, and one of the things that this dealership did when they came on board with our program is they went back and looked for all those negative reviews, and they sent a private response. This was a private response that they sent out to a dealership to a consumer that wrote a negative review for their dealership a year ago. And they got a response, and they were able to talk to that customer, and they actually worked a very successful resolution plan with a customer that had a bad experience over a year ago. So those it's not a bad thing to try to reach out. I think you just need to frame it in terms of we just became aware of it. It's not like we've been ignoring it. We just found out about it.
Okay. Do you recommend that you ask customers to do a review while they're at the dealership, or should you ask them to wait till they get home?
Yeah, you can ask them to do it there. You should. I mean, you should ask. Let me be really clear about what I just said. You can ask them if they'd be willing to do it. You should not be asking them to complete a review in store. You should not be doing that, folks. I'm gonna take a really strong stance on this, Brian, and I hope it's okay, because if you're still thinking about that, you need to hear it. That is a failed strategy. That ship sailed 2 years ago. Google went and wiped a ton of content, and one of my acquaintances is a guy named Mike Blumenthal who had an NDA with Google at the time. But Google was actually very clear about which industries they were looking at in terms of fraudulent content, and we were one of them, along with dentists. And it's because of some of the patterns that they were seeing. They know where a review comes from. They know that it was written in store. You're not pulling the wool over Google's eyes by using a rotating IP on a 3G network. There are a lot of other ways to determine where that's coming from. And I would just strongly encourage any dealership employees that are thinking about a strategy of having the customer write a review while they're at the store to go read the terms of use of the sites that you want to have those reviews post on. And what you'll find very quickly is Google prohibits it, Yelp prohibits it, DealerRater prohibits it. That's not credible content, and I think you're working really hard to have nothing to show for it once that content comes down. The other thing that I see sometimes that I want to take a strong stance on here too, absolutely inappropriate to ask a customer to write a review for you before they go into F&I. Writing a review is not a time filler. It should not be. If that's a process improvement issue, if you've got 3 hours before a consumer can get in to get financed, then that's what you need to be focusing on, not coming up with ways to fill that time. The purchase isn't complete. I think the dealership sometimes thinks that we're done, right? We've negotiated, they've agreed to a price. The consumer doesn't think that their interaction with you is done until the wheels go over the curb, and sometimes it's beyond that. You don't want to be asking them to tell a story about how great you were and have something not work out in finance. That is not the right way to go.
Okay. Let's see.
Sorry, I was a little passionate about that. It's one of those things it keeps coming up, and really that ship sailed when Google struck the content the first time. That really should have been the clear and present warning that wasn't the right strategy for review collection.
Okay. Actually, I have a question for you. What do you recommend that people do if a customer just absolutely refuses to reconcile over an issue, and it starts to get a little bit ugly? I mean, kind of like some Facebook, conversations? I mean, what do you do at that point?
Yeah, the high road is always the right road because, another G.I. Joe saying, right? But you can win the battle and lose the war. That's absolutely true with responses. You may be able to point to all of the reasons why the consumer is wrong. That isn't going to impact any prospects down the road to want to do business with you. You always have to take the high road, and I think it always needs to. I think the termination point for that is always, Mr. Customer, we'd love to try to understand what's going on, but the best way for us to do that is going to be in a conversation with our general manager whose contact information is this. You're going to need to get that review offline. And from there, dealerships are exceptional at having that discussion with the consumer and understanding where they're at and proposing things that work beneficially for both parties. That's something that our management staff at dealerships is great at. So we just have to take it offline to where there can be a real conversation, and that should always be the overture. Okay.
Hey, I would like to invite all of the people that were on this webinar today. As you take away some of the ideas that you learned today, and as you implement changes in your processes at the dealership, a month from now, if you've really seen a change, I mean, if you've really got a great story to tell, I would be interested in hearing it for a possible article in an upcoming issue of Auto Success. So my email is Brian with an I at autosuccessonline.com, and I would love to hear stories about how this webinar has impacted your dealership. Give it 30, 60, 90 days, and just let me know. And if you've really seen some dramatic changes, I would love to share your story with dealers across the country. Ryan, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today and to share all this valuable information. Also, if anybody has any additional questions that we didn't get to, please just email Ryan or myself. We would love to help you find answers to those questions. Anybody that would like to get a copy of that sheet that Ryan showed earlier, Ryan, do you mind sharing your email address so they can email you directly?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. It's really easy. It's Ryan, R-Y-A-N, at DealerRater.com. That's all together, no dots or dashes, DealerRater.
Perfect. Well, hey, everybody, I appreciate you coming to this webinar today. This is the first in a series of webinars that we're going to be doing frequently with Auto Success now to help kind of take the good information we have in the magazine. We want to take it to a more interactive and more deliver more education to our readers. So please look for future ones. Join us again. Thank you again, Ryan. And if anyone would like a recording, send it to me, please.
Thank you, Brian. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. You too.